recording. So good afternoon. This is Jonathan Klein. Before we begin, I have my little text here. I'll confirm that all members and other persons anticipated to participate are present and can hear me as we've been chatting before the meeting began. And everyone should identify themselves prior to speaking. This is a meeting of the Accessory Dwelling Unit Subcommittee of the Housing Advisory Board in open session, being conducted remotely, consistent with state law. Public access does not require the inclusion of public participation unless it's required by law. But we are a small group and we will allow public comment and participation as we have in the past as appropriate. We're convening by video conference as posted on the town's calendar. If you're not speaking, you're not required to identify yourself. And you have the option to attend anonymously by calling in by phone as posted on the agenda. So the meeting is being recorded. Anything that you broadcast may be captured, including your video. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you are welcome to turn it off. But I will make my personal plea that anyone that is comfortable, it's a much better meeting if we can see everyone as if we were actually in the same room. So all meetings provided to members of the body are available on the town's website and as links in the agenda. We will follow the agenda unless otherwise noted. And I think that's all I have to say. So let me get that down and out of the way. And get the agenda up. So you'll recall at the last meeting, we talked about how we were going to work with the setback and height restrictions. And since that time, I have met with the staff to talk through their communications with the Attorney General and suggested ideas about how we can address that. That resulted in a draft that has been circulated and that we're going to discuss today. Dick Benka has circulated a revised version of his draft that he had sent us a while ago that responds, I think, to some of those comments. You will see on the agenda, there's a agenda item called Dick Benka Concepts. I just want to clarify that the proposal for that for today is to discuss the concepts in his draft related to height and setbacks and not all of the proposals he made, which we will, as I said earlier, address at a future meeting, perhaps the next one. So that's where we stand. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Emily. Are there any questions before we start about the agenda?
Do we want to do meeting minutes?
Oh, do I want to do meeting minutes? Thank you. I don't see them as an attachment to the agenda packet.
Yeah, I never
Did I
saw
miss
them.
them?
Huh. Okay.
I think you sent them to me, but I actually don't see them attached to the agenda. So I think maybe we should wait. Is that right?
Yeah, I couldn't find
Yeah,
them.
I think they just didn't get attached in the posting. So yeah, let's wait for next week. Sorry about that. I didn't catch that.
Okay, I didn't either, I confess. So my bad also. They are done. Emily did a great job on them. They looked good to me, but we'll wait till the next meeting. Okay, with that said, I guess I'd like to turn it over to Maria and or Emily and or Jonathan or all of them to go ahead and walk us through your thinking and revised proposal on how we work with setbacks and height, given the Attorney General's instructions, and maybe including also the updated conversation that Jonathan has had with them.
Yeah,
So,
I think we should start there. Jonathan, you spoke with Margaret and you conveyed that to Jonathan Klein and staff, but I think the committee needs to understand what transpired.
Sure thing. So I had been trying to get a phone call with Margaret Hurley, who's the former head of the municipal law unit in the Attorney General's office. That's the group that reviews all town bylaw amendments. So when we say like the town meeting vote needs to go to the AGO, that's the municipal law unit. She has transitioned to sort of a liaison role within the AGO, where she's worked sort of the person between the AGO, or she's still in the AGO, but she works with the EOHLC, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, helping them sort of with the legal side of the rollout of their sort of successive programs, and particularly zoning amendments that relate to housing. And the ADUs is definitely one of those. So I had spoken with her successor at the MLU, Kelly Gunnigan, earlier this year, and she had recommended that I speak with Margaret. I was speaking with Margaret about a particular case that had come before our office from Brooklyn related to ADUs. But our discussion was more wide ranging, and I think does speak to how should probably inform how we approach this issue. And I think it informed how the new proposal you sort of see before you, and it also gives us another avenue for getting some review at the state level before we ultimately elect to file anything with town meeting. Essentially, I had asked in a number of different ways about interpretations of, in this case, a particular situation that would mean the exemption that you'd apply, the zoning exemption you'd apply to an accessory dwelling unit might not apply in this case. And she had a number of responses, kind of rebutted every single run I made at her, sort of saying, nope, it's supposed to be exempt, it's supposed to be exempt, it's supposed to be exempt. And one of the things that she said that I most wanted to relay to this committee is that the notion that, we've talked a number of times about, is it really, are they serious that you can take like the height from a principal structure and the setback from an accessory structure and kind of Frankenstein those together and end up with this kind of ridiculous, 35-foot high structure 6 feet from a property line? And she said essentially EOHLC is aware that is a possibility and is comfortable with that being is comfortable with that interpretation. Now, does that mean that's what they want? Of course not. But I think they have chosen to err on the side of permissiveness when it comes to that sort of thing. So we needed to, when we sort of looked at this again, we really needed to take that into account. So the proposal that you see before you, and I'll let Maria get into it a little bit more detail, I think critically gives a way that theoretically you could end up with that situation, because we felt like anything else, and he's kind of trying to restrict like across the board, not allow that situation, is going to get ruled out of hand. It's just essentially that it's going to be found unreasonable. We have a suspicion that it will be found unreasonable. We nonetheless believe that's kind of silly, and we tried to basically come up with a concept that would nonetheless allow for a sort of understanding that the basic way Brookline would like to do this is the way we've all talked about in these meetings, which is if you're close to the property line, you should be shorter than if you're farther away from the property line. And we tried to do this without changing a bunch of other things in the zoning bylaw that could potentially create prior nonconformities, or just simply remove previously exercised rights that homeowners or property owners in Brookline currently enjoy, all in the name of theoretically making it more difficult to build ADUs. So we tried to keep sort of more or less the ADU situation in ADUs, with one exception being changing in our dimensional table. If you look at it, almost every single district has this kind of, the bottom line in each district cell is any other structure or use, which we felt was kind of it was unworkable as applied. The building department was kind of meant to, if you have this kind of structure that's not, that a principal use that doesn't fit the district, this is the dimensionals you're supposed to apply to it. But unfortunately, the way it was worded, it was also kind of bringing in accessory structures in a way that was going to make meshing it with our ADU bylaw was going to make it increasingly problematic. So that's the one kind of way outside of the ADU bylaw that we tried to kind of fix something. We didn't see it as a taking away anybody's rights. It more of a, we just want to make sure this all works together harmoniously. But then finally, the last thing from my conversation with Margaret that I did want to bring to the subcommittee's attention was Margaret, even more than Kelly Gunnigan had, offered to review what we come up with and see if it would, and she's the person that looks at these basically at ADU bylaws. She reviews all of them in conjunction with the MLU. So she said, it doesn't need to be a final draft. It doesn't need to be the whole thing. That's kind of why we focused on just the heights and setbacks right now. But she said, send me the concept and I'll tell you if it's workable. So in light of that, Maria and I and Emily worked out a draft proposal that is, it's not comprehensive. It's not meant to be the entire warrant article. It's kind of the heart of it, what we're going to do with height and setbacks, which is really where we're kind of bumping up against this, the way the EOHLC's regs appear to, the interpretation I guess we're supposed to use, kind of doesn't seem like a good way to develop these from anybody's perspective. It's just going to create headaches, and if we over restrict, it'll let people run to the ZBA claiming they're exempt under Dover, and on the other hand, neighbors are going to, I know Dick has brought up a number of times that whatever we propose does need to pass town meeting. So we wanted to bring something, at least now at this point, when we have a chance to have the subcommittee look at it, tinker with it, rework it to what you see fit. We come up with a concept we like as sort of option A, then we can send it to Margaret and she'll look at it and say if it's workable, and if it is, we can keep going with it. If not, we can scrap it and move to a sort of a different approach, which could go a number of different ways that we don't really need to get into right now. But that's sort of where we are. So the AGO appears to have confirmed some of our suspicions that these regulations really do are more permissive than I think you might. They are subject to a much more permissive interpretation than you might otherwise think.
Okay. Thank
That's
you
helpful.
for
Are
that.
there any questions for Jonathan before we go on? That was a lot of words, I know.
Sorry.
I've heard it before and it makes sense to me, but any questions about that before we go on with Maria? Alex?
At one or 2 points, so I understand everything. I believe I understood, but at 1 or 2 points, you referenced that the state level they're saying, or generally the interpretation is more permissive, and then you gave a caveat after, like, yeah, but they wouldn't really want the full of that, and I'm just wondering the full extent of that Frankenstein, both of them together, and is that something the state expressed hesitation toward, or is that layered kind of from the Brookline perspective?
It's sort of in the middle. I think it's kind of reading between the lines. If you look at all of the guidance documents, the words say this one interpretation, but everything they're doing graphically, every description they're doing, all their press releases, they don't reference structures that are 35 feet high. They're referencing the kind of thing I think everybody in the subcommittee is thinking of when they think of a detached ADU, which is a low slum structure, kind of close to the property line. It's only 900 square feet. So if you go to 35 feet, it really begs the question of what's that even going to look like on the interior? So I think that's where I'm getting that. But I appreciate, Alex, that you're pointing out, like, no, there is no, you're not going to find it in writing that this is not what we actually mean. I'm kind of giving a little bit of a gloss to it.
Thanks.
Okay. Helpful. Any other questions for Jonathan? And take it away, Maria. Thank you.
Okay, so just to link where we were last time, remember staff was working on a concept. It was this sliding scale concept, which tried to mesh our requirements for side and rear setbacks for 15-foot tall accessory structures and what is allowed for those dimensions for the principal use. And in light of Jonathan's conversation with Margaret, we scrapped that. We said there's no way they're going to give credence to it, so we need to start someplace different. So just to keep in your mind, remember the statute and the regs don't make any distinction between attached protected use ADUs and detached protected use ADUs. For what we have in our bylaw right now, accessory structures or buildings in required side and rear cannot be more than 15 feet, and the minimum side and rear setback is 6. Okay. But as Jonathan, and I'm going to just show you in the bylaw what Jonathan was referring to. We have this weird thing. And I don't know if you can see this. Maybe we'll just bump it up a little bit. In really every single zoning district, this is table 501 that pertains to dimensional requirements. You see that there is this line that says any other structure or principal use. So that's other than what is listed above. And this any other structure is actually kind of a thing that doesn't get noticed, but it is the way the building department, the commissioners, do allow detached structures to be taller than 15 feet. So we have seen structures that can go up to maybe, I don't know, 24, even 26 feet. And so this is actually a problem or you might say that the intent might be contrary to the requirements that we have for accessory buildings in required side and rear yards. So our idea was and at this point I am going to pull up the draft that we were working on and what we focused on. Okay, so I'm just going to skip over this bit. We'll get to those definitions in a moment. Starting with table 501, we recommend actually taking out that phrase or clarifying that phrase structure or, and stipulating that this is really about principal use or principal structure so that we don't have any potential conflict with our intentions for accessory structures and ADUs. Now, you know that from what you've heard Jonathan say, the state is erring on the side of permissiveness. Okay, so we're flirting with something here and we're actually testing this, but we're going into the bylaw sections for accessory buildings or structures in side and rear yards. And we're creating this kind of 2 tiers. So typically accessory buildings or structures shall not exceed 15 feet. We're keeping that. But we're coming up with another category that says accessory buildings or structures with more than 200 square feet of habitable area. So we're introducing this idea of, say, either mixed use or habitable area accessory buildings, not necessarily dwelling units, shall not exceed 22 feet in height. So now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, didn't the AG's office say, hey, if the principal use, the maximum height is 35 feet, we can't be more restrictive than that. So the idea here is that if you are closer than 6 feet to the side and rear, the okay, where is that? Building, okay, hold on. I've lost my place. Ah, where is it? Well, anyway.
I think you misspelled so
Oh, I did. That's why I can't find it. Thank you for that. Okay. I'm sorry. This is like the 4th meeting of the morning today. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay. So this is what I want to change. We are talking about changing in the the protected use ADU bylaw. So if we change these parameters, and we have something that is like a different tier for accessory buildings with habitable area. We're showing that we're treating habitable area just differently. So there is this good faith effort to give them more height, which we feel, say, for detached structures makes sense if you have a mixed use. You have the garage on the bottom and then you have habitable space above. That is geometrically is going to be feasible for a mixed use, protected use ADU. So how do we loop this in? So we're going to say in section 405, that is the protected use ADU bylaw, that the maximum allowed height is 22 feet, but there is an exception to allow the full height that is allowed for the principal use by way of the building commissioner. And we're asking for what we think is a reasonable regulation, that if the owner provides evidence like a GFA calculation to the satisfaction of the building commissioner, that the maximum allowed height under this section would preclude the construction of the protected use ADU, that would be the reason for the building commissioner to allow the owner to proceed by right. Now, this is a way of allowing, at least saying what our preferred height is for detached ADUs without saying detached ADUs are going to be treated one way. So in essence, we think that most people will find the 22 feet in height sufficient for their purposes, but it also allows any attached ADUs, if they have to exceed 22 feet in height, they would be allowed to do so. So the state is kind of hamstringing us a little bit by saying that you cannot treat detached and attached differently. So this is our way of getting around it by letting folks who want to do the detached, they go on their merry way. And at least they're not, if we just say 15 feet, you can be sure that they're going to exercise their rights under Dover, and then there is no ceiling. But at least by having some breaks, and this is really all this is, we're saying our preferred maximum height is 22 feet. At least we'll let people go on their merry way. For those who have to do the attached, I realize I'm repeating myself, but I want to make it clear for those who want to do an attached protected use ADU and they might need to exceed the 22 feet in height. Let's say they have a 28 foot tall home and they want to put a structure that's 22 feet or maybe 24 feet in height. They wouldn't be allowed to do so unless they got the building commissioner to give them a thumbs up. So they just have to go through this extra step. I realize it's not everything that maybe the more concerned folks want. Maybe they just want to have that. They don't want a 22 foot tall protected use ADU 6 feet away from the side and rear. But we do have to acknowledge reality as it exists today. And this is the state is being rather permissive. So this is one way to at least have a say in these outcomes. I'm taking, this is my hunch that most people will be okay with the 22 feet and that, it's worth trying to see if the AGO will allow that step involving the building commissioner, where honestly, I don't see where we're taking people's that by right option away.
So let me just clarify a couple things. So when you say the state is being permissive, you mean permissive toward ADUs, not permissive toward the town's regulation of it, right?
Correct. Yes, it's certainly an interpreting that the statute and the regulations that you can do this Frankenstein combination that Jonathan was talking about.
Right. And then secondly, you mentioned Dover. Did you mean Diedrich when you said that?
No, I meant Dover. So remember,
Can you explain how
yeah.
Dover impacts that for folks?
So protected use ADUs that is under the statute, Chapter 40A, Section 3, which is also called the Dover Amendment. And you might recognize that religious uses, nonprofit educational uses, daycares are protected under Dover. And what that means is that we can reasonably regulate them in terms of massing, height, bulk, parking, open space. But we can't deny them. So they are allowed in just about every district. And so that's sometimes why you see like the 6-story tall, I guess you call it the beat building on Harvard Street. That's how that got to be built under Dover. Basically, it's a way to usurp zoning.
But how does that relate to ADUs and what we're talking about here?
Protected use ADUs are protected under Dover.
Or
So
protected under Dover?
they are protected. So if we have a very stringent bylaw, people will exercise their rights under Dover, and we don't know what that ceiling is. So that's why we're introducing this idea of a break, saying we prefer the height to, we don't say prefer, but the idea here is that we prefer the height to be no more than 22 feet if you have habitable area. And if you can't do that, we're going to allow the building commissioner to just, you know, allow you to do that. We just want you to show us that you couldn't build an ADU without that additional height. Now, honestly, how many people are going to take us up on that? You know, I don't think height is really going to make so much of a difference here. It's what really people need is footprint.
Okay, so let's take comments or questions from the committee, and then we can go to anybody else. Kelly?
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you both Maria and Jonathan for this proposal. I have to say I'm a little bit confused with how this height in setback piece, the maximum height allowed of protected use ADU is 22 feet, will apply to an ADU within a principal structure. I guess that's where you lost me. It made perfect sense in terms of a detached ADU, but recognizing that they could be a top floor, an attic conversion. If you could walk me through that, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. So if there were to be a protected use ADU in an attic, and Jonathan, we're talking about internal, we say with no external, like no dormers or no bump out or anything like that. I think that would be allowed. That's what the commissioner is allowing now. So wherever there are internal, it's already in a structure that's built. This 22 feet doesn't really limit that. It's where you get into any changes to the structure where you're going to say, maybe you're going to, I don't know, add a floor or expand a floor or do a bump out that is off a top floor. Maybe, you know, anything like that could potentially run up against this max 22 feet in height. And here the building commissioner, you know, would be able to say, sure, if you weren't able to expand your height, then certainly you wouldn't be able to do a protected use ADU. And by way of looking at the calculations, for instance, it wouldn't be possible if you didn't have that alteration. So I can see the building commissioner allowing it by right.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Are there other questions or comments from the committee? Okay. Other questions or comments from the public?
I don't have, I'm not the public, but
Go ahead. Emily.
Maria, can you just explain habitable space versus dwelling and why that is important to define in here?
Right. So the idea of introducing this different tier and talking about habitable area is sometimes we see structures that are, say, it could be a garage, a detached garage, and then someone will put a yoga studio above that. And sometimes you see like a 26-foot tall structure. So the idea here is to actually put some reasonable parameters around that. And the reason why that happens is when I showed you 501, it's this any structure, that's how you get situations like that. So habitable area, the yoga studio isn't a dwelling unit. It doesn't have a kitchen. It's just a space where there's going to be human activity. Is that okay? Emily, does that help?
Yeah, and I think that you were saying too, sometimes those get could be transformed into ADUs, so it's good to have that in place beforehand.
Great. We also, I think the last time we met, I showed you some slides. There were some sketches that showed the 22 feet, the 22-foot tall accessory structure. This was in plan and in elevation, what that would look like six feet away, or maybe that was 7.5 feet away. But you get, I also had 6-foot margins as well.
So I have a clarification. So just to clarify, you know, as you said, you feel like the sliding scale that we were talking about last time is out the door. That if you strictly look at how to interpret the guidance, we could be in the position of allowing under our current zoning a 35-foot ADU next to 6 feet away from the property line.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody thinks that is a good result, although it also seems like an unlikely result given the geography and dynamics of that. But what we're proposing as a compromise is to allow up to a 22-foot structure, 6 feet from the property line, right? And that would be a structure that could be the full 22 feet on the property line, not a peak with a sloped roof down lower, but it could potentially be a block, a full, like a square block construction that would be like one floor over a garage, which is one of the things that when many people think of ADUs, that's one of the things they think of is, like a flat on top of a garage. And that would allow that kind of structure and would allow it up to 6 feet. So just
6 feet away, yes. So we tried to have massing standards in our in staff's initial proposal in fall 24, and that was struck. The idea of the pitch roof or the 1.5 stories, and then we defined half story. But one thing I think we have in this bylaw that the AGO didn't flag was a comment about roof form being somewhat comparable to that of the principal structure. That wasn't struck. So it's possible that that still will fly here. That's so. And the other thing I just want you to think about is that we have a study we're working with some town meeting members about if scoping out if folks in precincts 3 and 6 would like to do a form-based zoning study for that 2-family area. And this is an opportunity for folks
That's the area we call Toxteth Perry. Right?
Correct. Yes. Okay. And folks there, if they're introducing form-based zoning, this might be a way to extend that concept to ADUs. So, that might be an opportunity to refine this further if we're looking at form-based zoning as an approach. So one thing we can just think about here is that, do we see a lot of flat roofs? That 26-foot tall mixed use structure I was talking about, with the yoga studio above the garage, that had a pitched roof. I don't think we're seeing a lot of flat roof, double decker, detached structures. And I think Tommy, who's on the planning board, can vouch for that. So for now, let's just think about this in layers. As this evolves, maybe we can have more massing standards depending on our zoning approach.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions? Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Dick, I know you've had some thoughts on this, so maybe now is a good time to express them or to give us your feedback on what we've heard so far.
Okay, I actually was going to wait until my item came up on the agenda, but I'll be happy to.
Yeah, no, I think we should talk everything in an integrated way.
Okay. Well, let me just start with my concern with the general concept, which is expressed in 5.63 and 5.72 as amended, which essentially allow structures up to 22 feet in height, 6 feet from the property line. And those, I think, essentially compels, that provision essentially compels a block type building if you're going to put a second floor on the top. I have a sense that you're not likely to get 2 stories and much of a sloped roof within 22 feet. I know that the 22 feet that we had initially was a story and a half with a half story on the second floor. But if you're trying to maximize square footage within that 22-foot height, you're probably talking about a block building or something very close to it with maybe a 1 foot or a 2 foot slope on the roof, but hardly something that I think people would be inclined to favor. When you get down to 405.3b2, the last section, which allows the exception driven by the building commissioner, and includes explicitly a 6 foot side yard setback and 6 foot rear yard setback, you're essentially opening the door there to a 35 or 40 foot height, 6 feet from the neighboring property line. And again, I think that is something that certainly concerns me and will concern others. The other thing that hasn't been, I think, taken into consideration here, maybe it has, is section 5.43 of the existing zoning bylaw, which allows the ZBA, which allows special permits to encroach on the minimum required side yard, front yard, rear yard setbacks. And that, I think, can happen when layered on top of this without any real control. What I've suggested in my draft is that, for example, with section 5.43, there be a provision attached to that that says, notwithstanding the foregoing and the option to negate setbacks, no height greater than 15 feet shall be permitted for any new building or structure, new addition, or other new construction. And we could insert a date there after X date to avoid a Diedrich problem within the lesser of the side yard, front yard, rear yard setbacks as shown in table 5.01 for the principal use. And then I relax that a little bit, or 15 feet from a side lot line or 25 feet from a rear lot line, essentially putting in place the 15-foot protective buffer when you are 6 feet from the neighboring property line. And, you know, we can certainly discuss this. I think I would argue that it will be more acceptable to individuals, something definitely to be considered than saying you can go 22 feet high, 6 feet from a neighboring property line, front or rear. So, and, you know, we can talk through this a little bit more, but I've inserted that provision. And let me just say the reason that I've done it, referring to any new building or structure, new addition or other new construction, is to deal with the EOHLC regulation that says that you have to treat all buildings the same. So this would apply across the board to any any new building that encroaches on the property line up to 6 feet.
Thank you. I want to hear staff's response, but I see Tommy's hand is up, so maybe we'll go to Tommy first.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Dick, you're proposing like a blanket town-wide zoning change with regards to height within setbacks. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be
Okay.
that step. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a potential way to do it. I don't know. That feels like it requires more more study, I suppose, more to think about than just, well, let's do this so we can avoid ADUs in certain areas. But as to I've heard you voice throughout this process concerns with, flat roofed boxes. To me, it seems like if the concern is flat roof boxes, making the potential height of any ADU shorter doesn't help with that. It actually, as you've said, it encourages it. So I would think that wanting them to go to higher heights and then having design guidelines that require a pitched roof would better answer the concern about no one wants a flat roofed box. I don't think lowering it would help that. I think allowing the height to be higher, but requiring a pitched roof or, a gambrel roof, any number of types could be allowed. And you could even go further and, dictate the degree of pitch, which would have significant ramifications on the dimensionality of any ADU that would be built as well. Because if you require certain levels of pitch, you're going to have the ADU kind of fit a certain size to get the level of pitch to reach the height, right? So I think if your concern is that flat box, then I think you'd want higher with design guidelines as opposed to let's make it short. Just a thought.
Well, okay, just a quick response. The 15 feet would essentially, I think, be a 1-story with a pitch. Now, you could make it 10 feet high or 11 feet high or 12 feet high and have a flat roof. But the 15-foot height is what is in our existing zoning bylaw, and it's 1 story. The concern that I have is when you get to 22 feet and you're trying to put in a second floor. Now, you could say, okay, it can be 28 feet high or whatever. But you'd still have that massing 6 feet from a neighboring property line. And that, I think, would be a subject of concern. Let me just say the change with regard to 5.43 is driven to some extent by a quandary that I saw. Maybe it doesn't exist, but with regard to front yards, the clear intent is not to allow accessory buildings in front yards, but 5.43 does, by its terms, allow buildings in front yards, or it allows by special permit the ZBA to put a building in a front yard. Now, that I think nobody wants, and there may be a different way to deal with that in that section, and we just deal with the stepped height issue that I've raised with side yards and rear yards in 5.63 and 5.72. And then we won't have to fiddle with 5.43. But I just call people's attention to the potential problem that 5.43 could create. And I know now we're sort of talking inside baseball here.
Right. Is it okay for staff to weigh in?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, sure. And I want to thank Dick and Tommy for raising some really interesting concepts. The one I understand what Dick is trying to do here, and I'm afraid that there could be some backfiring if you are going to say make some blanket changes to 543. And that could be that, again, we can do all the hand wringing that we are doing, but what owners will always have is Dover. So Dover, you can always exercise your rights under Dover, no matter what we say in the bylaw. And what we're doing by turning 543 into something more restrictive is that there could be pre-existing nonconformities that say get extended under Section 6, or there could be a situation for principal uses where they're confronting variances. So I think it could be that this mechanism might be the tail wagging the dog, meant to control or regulate protected use ADUs in a way that has unintended consequences for principal uses. It is not a perfect provision, Dick, and that's the problem with 543. It's kind of like a catch-all. But I think we would have to do something more overhauling the zoning and right-sizing zoning for different neighborhoods to actually do away with the 543, or at least put some limits on it. So I value the problem that you're highlighting. I just think the change might create more problems. Your point about pitch and 22 feet. I agree. I think that is an issue. And I actually touched upon it when I showed some slides the last time we met, where 22 feet might be the lowest possible that you can have with the garage on the first floor, the insulation, and then the livable area. But if you want to have some freedom to have a comparable design for your roof form, you might have to be more flexible with height, and it might have to go up to 24 feet. And we can at least show some diagrams showing typical roof forms, and if you want to have that same roof form and a comparable pitch. And I'm looking at our former preservation planner here. We can look at some examples in real time, just to see what I mean by having more flexibility with height if we want to have pitched roofs on the ADUs, but certainly making them lower is not going to be helpful. In terms of how many occurrences of detached garages we have, I'm going to pick on Toxteth Perry because we've done a micro scale analysis already. It's about 300 parcels in a 60-acre area. This is the town's largest contiguous T5 two-family district. Of those 300 parcels, I would say a good third have detached garages. And so it is really likely, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, it's going to be hard to have an ADU that's attached or as a separate, yet a second detached structure. It is possible to see that someone who is a regular homeowner is not going to change their roof and do something that involves structural engineering when they can do something on maybe they have to demolish or rebuild that detached structure, but there's a lot less in capital costs if you're focused on a detached structure to accommodate a protected use ADU. And that's why I'm really trying to be realistic with what people are inclined to do, considering our development patterns. And then I think the other thing is you would still keep the 25%. Is that right? So that right now we have a bylaw that says no more than 25% of the required rear yard can be allocated to accessory structures.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You kept that, I kept that. Yep.
Right. So, that restriction is going to compress footprints. So, if you don't allow sprawl, then you got to have height. So it's a trade-off. And I certainly recognize we don't want to lose canopy and open space, but something has to give.
Well, let me just make 2 points. Number one, when you say people would exercise their rights under Dover, the ADU statute does allow explicitly reasonable limits on bulk, height, massing, and so forth. So it's not, there's nothing that says every property in town has a right to create a protected use ADU on site. And there's nothing in the statute that says that. There's nothing in the regulations that says that. And indeed, the ability that to have reasonable regulations of dimensional standards and so forth really does cut against that. So I don't think that you should necessarily be proceeding from an assumption that, well, okay, somebody could go to Dover and they'd have a right to build something 35 feet high. You
Right.
know, it's,
I think I
you
just
know,
might ask town council to weigh in because, you know, we do wonder what does reasonable regulation mean? It hasn't stopped a 6-story structure on Harvard Street where the maximum height is, say, 40 feet for most of that stretch.
I think that the reasonable regulation concept originated with when people were litigating religious and educational uses. The presence of that language in the statute, there's a provision for reasonable regulation for educational and religious uses. Just the fact that that language is in there doesn't mean that there hasn't been case after case after case after case of people doing exactly what Maria is saying, being told by a municipality, no, this is a reasonable regulation of what you're trying to do, and them nonetheless taking that municipality to court and winning because the regulation was found to be unreasonable. With ADUs, I think the state was trying to get ahead of that and have EOHLC draft regulations that explicitly reference what they believe is going to be unreasonable. And that's one of the ways, one of the things we keep talking about you have to take the most permissive dimensional requirement. That's there because they're saying if you don't, your regulation is unreasonable.
right.
But that is not the sum total of what could conceivably be called unreasonable. So I think that in a lot of circumstances, and I think the 25% one is right at is potentially going to be right at the heart of this. If that is having the effect over and over, well, not even over and over, if a particular landowner says, but for this 25% requirement, I could build an ADU, a 900 square foot ADU, and conform to everything else, I think then they would be perfect. Like I think they would have a legitimate
Well, they could
reason
go
to
to
go
court.
to seek a legal challenge and say not that you didn't apply the most permissive standard, but that simply that the application of the town's regulations is unreasonable and I should be exempt. And it'd be the same argument we have in all of the Dover cases that we've had before with respect to other exempt uses. The town would be forced to sort of show that it isn't, and would be also now warring against the language in the regulations that says if you have the effect of preventing an ADU on a particular parcel, you're going to have to show that, it's much higher standard of proof to show that your zoning isn't unreasonable. So, I think it's tough. But I think Maria is fundamentally right. And I think that just from a personal perspective, I think the town is best served by coming up with a zoning scheme that is not going to push a lot of homeowners or property owners to fight, feel like they need to bring Dover challenges. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I think that, for example, I would never counsel the town to amend its zoning in a way that, well, we know it's too restrictive. If anyone doesn't like it, they can just bring a Dover Amendment challenge and we'll do it on a case-by-case basis. I don't think that's the right way to do this. But that's not to be said that every single Dover Amendment challenge wins. And I think that we are trying to nonetheless regulate these uses at this point. That's what both of the approaches in front of you today do that. But I think to me, that's what Maria meant, and I think that's a valid point.
Well, any challenge is by definition not such a good thing, right? Because it means we're in a battle with one of our residents, and the town has to expend resources to defend it. So it is a good thing to be avoided if it can. I want to focus on what I think is a fundamental question that we are addressing and maybe dancing around, but it's this: if should we allow a protected use ADUs that could be as high as 22 feet, maybe even higher with a sloped roof, if we decided that's a better form than, a block 22 foot, within 6 feet of a property line, right? And I think, Dick is arguing that that's something that many homeowners would find unacceptable if it was located right next to them, right? They wouldn't want to see a two-story building, 6 feet from the property line if it was close to them. And I think that what the state statute is telling us, and what the state statute that favors the creation of ADUs is telling us, is that we need to be as permissive as possible in allowing ADUs to fulfill the state policy of creating ADUs, creating more housing opportunities. And that also creates opportunities for our homeowners, for our residents. I think we'd find a lot of residents on the other side of that line who said, yeah, but I want to put a flat on top of my garage, right? And I want the right to do that. And on my 5,000 square foot lot, that by necessity is going to be, not 15 feet from the property line. It is going to be 6 feet or 7.5 feet from the property line. So I think that's a decision that the committee needs to weigh in on in terms of which direction we want to go on that. And I think, Dick has a reasonable argument, has proposed an alternate approach to that. You might want to articulate your alternate approach a little bit more, but it's really, prohibiting any new structure within that space, right? So we're not just picking on ADUs, and that is an attempt to comply with the regulatory requirements. I've heard Jonathan say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that even that, if it was done on a structure and town-wide basis, could be interpreted as unreasonable by the AG if it was seen as an attempt to potentially restrict the ability to do ADUs. So that's something we would have to think about too. But I'd like to talk about the public policy issue of whether those are the kinds of structures that we would like to see allowed because they could lead to the creation of more ADUs, or the kind of structure we would like to not see allowed because they could create an unreasonable imposition on the neighbors. And that's, I think, the key question. There are lots of details to it. So Alex, and then maybe Dick, I'll let you respond and see if I've characterized this correctly from your point of view, and then Alex.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I do want to point out, and again, all of this is in flux, but the proviso that I drafted essentially said that where you're up to 6 feet from a neighboring property line, if you're within the setback for the principal structure, for the principal use on the lot, you're limited to the 15 feet in height. I also did include something of a pressure valve, saying that it is the lesser of that distance of the setback required, or 15 feet for a side yard, 25 feet for the rear yard. And those were numbers that we kicked around when we went through this the first time. That sort of pressure valve is something that could also be played with. If one wants to say, look, 22 feet is just too high if it's 6 feet, but it's okay if it's 25 feet, or maybe 15 feet or 10 feet. I want to raise the fact that there are a lot of levers that can be played with here. And I intentionally included that sort of escape valve for this 15-foot height. And that's something that you might want to consider.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Alex, and then Tommy had his hand up.
I wanted to start by saying I thought what Maria presented from the staff's recommendations seemed very sensible to me. I liked how it struck a nice balance of compromise, and the points that were outlined and how it fits into my understanding of what we're trying to do here is in reconciling the state and the town's efforts. Yeah, and some of the comments earlier about I linked what Maria said. Like there was already things that were struck down in last fall's town meetings, and that we had to restart and scrap the like scoped, slated.
Sliding scale, is that what you mean?
Yeah, sliding scale. Because I felt like some of what Dick and Tommy were talking about, we're kind of going back to those things, but it seemed like we already tried those things and they got pushed away. Also, that we'll have to not only find a middle point or a effective way to do both what the state and the town is interested in, but also have a way to engage what the state is looking for that will also pass town meeting. Are points these are all things that are going around in my head when we're in this conversation. And then Jonathan, your policy question, I would take it personally from a different stance, not starting with what should we allow, but what are fundamental constraints, because I'm hearing that, and then go to what we'd like after that, because I think starting with what we'd like and then trying to make that fit to our fundamental constraints is harder. Like, we can't be overly restrictive. But if we want something that is overly restrictive, that I feel like we should start with what we have to do and then go to what we'd like.
Okay, thank you. Tommy?
Yeah, I agree with Alex about the staff recommendations, but just circling back to a blanket change to 5.43, I don't think there's any number of pressure valves or levers that you can put in there that isn't going to instantly create a completely massive number of now pre-existing non-conforming properties all throughout Brookline. And it is just I don't know, it feels like using a sledgehammer to drive a nail, I guess. And I'm imagining the number of cases that would all of a sudden come to the planning board that would be directly impacted by, well, now there's an entire section of town where every single property is non-conforming. I mean, we see these setback issues all the time. I swear it's probably the most common, kind of pre-existing non-conformity already. And now you're going to add on to it. Well, now also every single building is also non-conforming to the height requirements. And it's just, man, it just feels like a really bad idea. I just don't think there's any way to make that sound like a good idea to me at all. Period. Full stop.
Kelly, we'll come back to you, Dick, but I want to get to Kelly.
Thank you.
Sure. Just a quick comment about what Dick had mentioned about some of the weaknesses of 543 already, meaning that an accessory building, basically, I believe, could be in a front yard. We could see one of those. Just a quick comment that Belmont has actually prohibited that with just one quick and easy design requirement saying that, sorry, hold on. Unless located within a pre-existing structure, a detached ADU shall not be located between a roadway and the principal dwelling. Again, if that's something we wanted to consider, I don't know whether that language has already gone by the AGO, but it is what is currently in Belmont's bylaw.
I think we tried to do that. We prohibited ADUs in front yards, and that was struck by the AGO's decision. So I don't know if Belmont has actually gotten their review.
That's a good point. I will also say I thought it was pretty interesting that they did not specifically mention the front yard. They said between the roadway and the principal dwelling. Anyway,
yep.
But just a thought, and just also wanted to echo Tommy's comments earlier about height and design. Happen to live near Toxteth Perry and know many of those 100 garages, and they're all pretty much if my memory serves me right. And they're all pretty much flat roof structures. They are cinder block garages for the most part. And so they're already flat roofed. And so certainly we would get something probably much more akin to what the rest of the neighborhood looks like, with sloped roofs, slightly higher roof line. We'd end up with nicer detached ADUs. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go to
Can I just
Maria.
jump in, Jonathan? Two quick
Yeah,
things.
go ahead.
The ADU, the AGO, excuse me, did not strike our prohibition on ADUs in front yards. It cautioned us that we
Okay.
can't do it in a way that is unreasonable, but
Mhm.
it didn't strike it. And I think critically, in a town like Brookline, where the sort of the normal dimensionality of the way lots are laid out, we don't have structures in the front yard. It's not crazy for us to extend that prohibition to ADUs. I think what they're constantly trying to do is saying you need to treat ADUs like you treat accessory structures.
Right.
And while I will admit that I did have a conversation with the AGO that they said, if in a situation where the only open space on any lot are these gigantic front yards, because every single house is set way, way back, right against their property line in the rear, then yes, maybe a ban on front yard ADUs would effectively be a ban, but that's not the way Brookline's layout works.
Right.
So I think we can I'm comfortable with preserving the language we have in our bylaw currently, which does bar them in the front yards. And also, I need to leave in like 10 minutes, just giving you guys a heads
Okay.
up.
But Jonathan, did they just flag it because it wasn't new language that they could actually review?
They said we cannot conclude that the section's prohibition against an ADU within front yards is unreasonable, and therefore we approve this provision.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
don't think we need to worry about front yard
Okay.
ADUs excessively. I think we can just basically say they're not permitted.
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Maria to respond to all the things that have come up and then back to
Yep.
Dick.
So I'm just trying to be a problem solver and not impose any aesthetics, any personal aesthetics. But you might recall when staff had proposed a 2.5-story concept in fall 2024, it was to get ahead of ADUs where we felt they could go, that the state was going to be permissive unless we had design guidelines. You know, if you did have that 2.5-story limit for S&T districts, it's conceivable that you could better expect anything above 15 feet or 9 feet to have a pitched roof. You don't have to go there, but I'm just throwing it out there as a way to deal with this concern that you might have a 2-story flat roof ADU deck.
Can you just elaborate more? So you're saying, are you
Right.
saying the concept would be 2 stories, or the concept would be, call it 26,
Yep.
28 feet with a sloped roof?
So something that's like a mixed use ADU that's 22 feet is really going to be 2.5 stories. But if we stipulate that principal uses are no more than 2.5 stories, then we can have that conceivably can be applied to protected use ADUs, so that we have to have some restrictions on principal uses in order to apply that concept to the protected use ADU. It's something I'd feel comfortable doing, since we don't see in single family districts a full 3 stories, because then that would trigger the commercial building code. Just because it's 3 stories, that's why you see 2.5-story structures. But you have to memorialize it in the zoning if you want to apply that concept to protected use ADUs. I'm not
Okay,
sure if that's helpful, but
I think I understand.
we'll keep it out there. We can revisit later.
Okay, Dick.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick thoughts about creating nonconformities. The language that I suggested would apply to any new building or structure, new addition, et cetera, built after the town meeting of the spring. And I'm not sure that creates a nonconformity, but Beyond that, the accessory buildings that would be in existence are not single family or two family buildings that would be covered by Diedrich. So, you know, a garage would not be able to argue that it can extend the nonconformity under Diedrich.
Jonathan, do we know that? Does Diedrich extend to accessory structures?
It does not, but they're structures that are not single and two family residences can still be prior non-conforming. They just can't expand the non-conformity.
Correct.
Moreover,
That's correct.
Tommy's point was that I believe Tommy's point was that we also have a lot of principal structures that are extending into the setback already. And if you which might be higher than 15 feet. And if you now say nothing over than 15 feet can enjoy a special permit under 5.43, you are running into this now. You've now made this structure that has a special permit that makes it legal, which theoretically keeps it out of nonconformity because it has that special permit. But now you have changed the zoning out from under it to say that it could no longer get a special permit, which does bring the question of nonconformity into account if they ever then tried to change it subsequently. So I do think that his point is well taken, especially given he sits on the planning board and he sees how often the advisory reports have cite 5.43 as what they need relief for. And this is not, I mean, nobody's building ADUs yet. It's all 5.43 is cited because people need it to expand their homes into the setbacks.
No, but I think my point on that is that the language that I'm suggesting would impose the limitation only by express terms only going forward. So that would make a pre-existing incursion not non-conforming. It would be, I mean, you know, it would not impose a new non-conformity on that.
This has always been shaky ground for Brookline to utilize, and I recognize we've utilized similar language in the past, but we do have a uniformity issue with respect to temporality when we start trying to say structures that are built after this point have one set of zoning and structures built before don't. Now we've sort of gotten around it by saying it's new construction.
Correct.
In the past. But again, what if you had a structure that wanted to build out further within the setback in which it already existed? That's new construction, but it's an old structure. So you're running into, you're still kind of bringing up I think you're still going to run into prior nonconformity structures, particularly since again, I don't want to speak for Tommy, he's sitting right here, but like his point I think is more global, is that every single time someone comes for 5.43 relief, we're now going to have this extra issue larded on top of it of like, well, are we also now we're tripping on this other thing, even though a year ago they could have done this with just a special permit. Now they can't. I think that his point is like, this is going to create a lot more the collateral damage to the zoning bylaw, I think should not be underrepresented here because 5.43 is widely used.
Yeah,
and I think just to follow on with Jonathan there, I don't think we can just say definitively 100% like, no, it certainly won't cause that problem. I mean, maybe it doesn't cause that problem, but I don't think I'm comfortable saying, no, it certainly will not create nonconformities. I mean, there's a lot of dominoes that could fall down. There's a lot of things that could happen. And I think I think assuming that the language proposed makes that a non-issue, I'm not comfortable getting there at all.
Yeah. Let me just say the 5.43 issue is one that emerged because of the front yard issue, primarily. 5.63 and 5.72 are the side yard and rear yard sections. And it may be that any changes can just be dealt with in those, or any limitations can just be dealt with in those sections with regard to accessory buildings. But I do think that we want to find a way and I think everybody agrees on this, we want to find a way to ensure that we're not allowing or encouraging structures within front yards under 5.43, which theoretically I think could happen now as 5.43 is drafted, with the exception of the one limitation that applies to M districts.
Okay.
To be
Jonathan, I have to log off, but
okay. Well, thank you
good
for
luck
your
with everything.
contributions, Jonathan. So I'm
Thank
not
you,
sure
Jonathan.
where to go with this. We're talking about, it feels like there's actually very little disagreement about about front yards and the result that folks want to happen. And I think that that's, I can't say I'm following 100% of that discussion, but that does not seem to be the critical question we need to answer. It feels to me like the critical question we need to answer is, and I want to see if folks feel like it's appropriate for us to try and come to a decision today, is about the staff's, overall proposal, that takes an approach that we could submit to the Attorney General for review. If it was, I think it's in, good shape. Maybe it needs a little more cleanup, or maybe there's a little more tweaking to it. I'm not sure that we could keep this moving by getting the Attorney General's review of that. Now, I know that that's, I've heard, I think Tommy and Alex express general support for it. I know Dick has an alternate approach that I think you've been able to explain fully. I don't know if people feel like we're ready to make a decision on that or not, or if others have thoughts on how we go about getting that and keeping this moving, which I feel like is my objective here. Alex.
It appeared that Jonathan said the former municipality person was open to just discussion, so we didn't have to submit a final version like we previously did. So I think it doesn't hurt at all, especially seeing that there's some consensus. Well, with the assumption that there's some consensus with some agreement on the staff recommendation, that pushing it up there and saying, "Hey, does this work? Is this going to likely get knocked down?" Getting that feedback doesn't hurt at all, and it's would be quite good in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what we learned is that we don't have to submit a full ADU bylaw to it's Margaret Hurley is the person that he referred to. I'm not sure we can just call up and say, hey, here's our concept. I think we do need to probably submit something in writing that explains it and details it and sets it out so she can review it, and maybe Maria.
My doorbell just rang. I'll be right back. I don't know what's going on.
Okay. Maria can explain that to us a little better as to what
Sure.
level of detail you think we do need to supply and what you need from this committee.
Of course. Yep. I think we can draft with Jonathan a cover letter to send to Margaret Hurley, just focusing on the concept.
On the concept without including the drafting that you've included here, just explaining.
Oh, no, we would absolutely include the language for the concept, the actual bylaw language for the concept, but we don't have to submit the entire protected use ADU bylaw unless you feel you're ready to, but
Well, I think there are a lot of other things, and I promised Dick, who has submitted a kind of carefully drafted, thoughtful, alternate, comprehensive set of comments, and we do need to go through those at a future meeting. So we're certainly not ready to submit the whole bylaw, but maybe we're ready to submit this part of it to get feedback on this concept. Kelly and then Dick.
Sure. Quick question, Maria, when you were talking about the Tux Teth Perry work that is potentially kicking off, I think, and maybe I misheard or misattributing this, but I thought I heard you say that there may be a way to apply form-based zoning over this. And so I'm certainly supportive of what we have suggested right now in terms of heights, but I just wanted to understand that a little bit more, because as I said, little concerned about all those 100 cinder block garages with flat roofs, and
correct.
wanted to understand what you were thinking there. Thanks.
Absolutely. So with form-based zoning, it's going to be more than simplistic like FAR and overall height. With form-based zoning, you are going to get involved if you want to. In the roof form, you can roof pitch, half stories, especially if 99% of the prevailing development pattern is that, and you want to allow, say, expanded living area within that form without incurring demolition, you probably are going to memorialize 2.5 stories. Again, you can still expand living area with dormers and so forth. So it does not preclude an attic unit that could be like, say, 1,200 square feet or 1,500 square feet. Okay. But the idea is that, as I was going back to earlier, if you cap that overall, say, form to 2.5 stories, that's kind of like form-based zoning light. And that could be
Okay.
a way not to have at least a 2-story ADU with a flat roof.
Okay, thank you. And that sort of gets back to one of the questions that I had about Dick's proposal, which was, I believe he included the language of 1.5 stories throughout.
Right. So the 1.5 stories would be problematic because we don't have principal structures are not 1.5
Okay.
stories. That's the only,
Okay.
but 2.5 stories,
Oh,
in those
now I
districts,
understand.
do you
Okay,
understand?
yep.
So if you
I
said
do,
in
yes.
S&T districts, the max is 2.5 stories,
Right.
then it's conceivable that any, protected use ADU can also be limited to 2.5 stories.
Okay, thank you. That is what I was missing. Perfect.
Dick.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether, in order to make this a profitable submission to the Attorney General, it makes sense to also outline an alternative approach as a possibility and see whether that would be acceptable. From not to make the political decision, but for the AG simply to make the legal decision.
That requires a little thought. Alex?
I feel like that goes in the wrong direction because I felt like we had one proposal that Jonathan Simpson talked through with the AG, and they said it was too restrictive, so we went less restrictive. But if I'm assuming correctly, Dick, you would say provide an alternative that's even more restrictive.
No.
Okay,
no.
sorry.
I think there's nothing in what I've done that has been rejected by the Attorney General.
So I am actually just going to weigh in and say that I'm just going to be candid. There is a concern that you are making it overall less permissive. And I think the AGO is going to flag that and think that that is actually a cynical approach to maybe not thwart ADUs, but just make it more difficult. I think that is a real concern. And that's why I would just be careful about going to that length. You know, I think it's hard to submit an alternative at the same time we're trying to do something that's focusing on having different tiers for accessory structures. So, maybe successively wait to hear what happens with, the staff's proposal, but I think it would be hard to do them at the same time, especially considering there is a concern about an approach that just seems overall less permissive.
Okay. So I hear, I'll say two things. I hear staff's resistance to and Alex's to the alternate approach. I think that we do have access to go back successfully if we do it efficiently. It feels like we do have access to Margaret to do that. And if our current approach gets knocked down, then we have to, rethink that. I think we have talked this through a lot. I'm reluctant to keep talking. So I guess I'd like to propose a motion that we, and I want to allow room for, perhaps a little tweaking if we feel necessary. If I know I talked to Dick and he had a couple of other I won't call them minor comments, but other comments that might want to take into account before we submit this that we haven't discussed now. That I think are more draftsmanship as opposed to this concept. But I guess I'd like to propose a motion that we accept the staff approach, ask the staff to draft a cover letter for the committee to, I don't know, do you want the committee to review and comment on it, or just want to draft it for submission to the Attorney General to get feedback on the approach we've been discussing?
I think we would just be repeating what we've said to you here. It's really just it's just purely technical to explain the concept, nothing more.
So that's my motion, and I will, any discussion on that motion before I call for a vote?
I'll second the motion.
Second, thank you. I need a second. Motions need seconds. Thank you. Okay. Any further comment, questions? All right, in that case, I will call for a vote in alphabetical order by first name. Alex.
Yes.
Kelly.
Yes.
Jonathan votes yes, and Tommy.
Aye. Yes.
Okay, so that motion passes, and we are at 1:57 p.m. So we will ask staff to carry that out. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's participation, especially Dick's. I know you put a lot into this and a lot of thought, and we appreciate that. I think that our next meeting, we should try and schedule that if we can in the next 2 minutes. But I think our next meeting should, I don't know if we'll have any feedback on this yet, but there are a number of other critical comments in Dick's revised draft that he circulated to us yesterday, and I think we ought to review those one by one at our next meeting and come to conclusion on that so that we can keep working on the rest of the bylaw while we're waiting for feedback on this portion of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so get out your calendars. This seems to be a good time and day for this group. So today is the 15th, and if we went 2 weeks out, we would be looking at the 29th. If we go 3 weeks out, we would be looking at November 5th. Does anyone have any views on either of those 2 dates?
So unfortunately, I can't do the 5th, but I could do the 29th.
Okay.
I have the opposite. I have a minor conflict, but I could try and get out of the 29th if we want to make the 2 weeks work.
Other thoughts?
The
Either
5th
one
is a
works for
HAB
me.
meeting too.
Yeah.
5th is a HAB meeting, right? So maybe if we got the 29th to work, we could actually be in a position to make a semi-substantive report to the HAB when it meets on the 5th. Okay. 29th. Okay, thank you for your flexibility, Alex.
Welcome. 29th, 12:30 to 2.
29th, 12:30 to 2. Going once, going twice. Sold. All right. I will take a motion to adjourn.
So
Second.
moved.
All right. Adjourned by acclamation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks,